Okay, so we've hit Big Little Lies Season 2, Episode 3, The End of the World. And it opens right off the bat with an intense flashback, actually showing the seconds right after Perry falls down the stairs. And it's from Bonnie's perspective, and everyone's freaking out. It was pretty cool to see that. And then we see Bonnie thinking about her mom actually forcing her to put her head underwater and dunk. And she was afraid of that. And I could totally relate to that because I had that happen to me from a camp counselor when I was a kid, and it was petrifying. And that's giving us more hint, obviously, to how her mom treated Bonnie and probably was very forceful about many things. I really love now in this scene with Madeline in therapy how they gradually reveal more and more, and it makes it very comical where you first just see her talking, and then you see it's the same therapist as Celeste, and then you see it's couple therapy with Ed. I actually really like that they're doing this now because it just gives us more time to spend in these characters' heads and to really understand Ed and Madeline better. And it's also hysterical to see how Madeline talks to this therapist. It's completely different than Celeste. Madeline is a stubborn cookie, and it's really tough to get through that head. And she fights back a lot, which makes some great television. And I really like in this couples therapy that the therapist calls out Ed also because she says he is disengaged. So it's not just Madeline getting the brunt of heat here. And this therapist reads right through Madeline, getting to the point that Madeline isn't happy with herself and has a lot of insecurities, and the biggest thing in her life is her insecurity about not going to college, and that's rooting from how she's so hell-bent on her daughter going there. And the therapist is really good at just taking that kind of information you think would be separate and even shocking Madeline to that point, like what does that have to do with anything? So she's good at breaking that down. And I love how Madeline's reacting like, Ed, did you feed her stuff? And when the therapist asks Madeline about her parents, Madeline just lies about them and says they had a great marriage for years. But then we see in the next scene in the car with Celeste, she tells Celeste that her father cheated on her mom, and she saw this at a young age. And this was really good writing, and it explained well why Madeline would possibly go the affair route and has basically a fear of marriage, that it doesn't work. Because at a young age, she's seeing it failing. And we actually get into Celeste's head here too in this scene when she's telling Madeline, as dead as Perry is, I think I'm deader. Whew. And that she thinks she was a better mom when he was alive because she needs to find joy for these kids, and he was the help for that. So right now she's just going down the full, I really was better with Perry route, and is just looking at all his good sides and everything wrong with him being away now and not looking at the horrible things that were there when he was alive. Now we cut to Louise just appearing to Jane here. But before we get into the scene, I want to say, out of any episode of Big Little Lie and any TV show I can remember in recent memory me watching, the editing in this episode, the amount of transitions they did in cutting to another scene really quick was way too fast. I mean, they would not let one scene breathe here. I'd feel like we'd hit tension in a scene or get to something good and you're getting locked in, and it would just cut to another scene. And I mean, if you counted how many cuts there were here, there had to be like 50 in one episode, and it's a 44-minute episode. It felt like it was just zigging and zagging, and it was like, why did we leave that scene in the first place to just go back to it in 2 minutes? Just finish out that part and then go to the next scene. It was just way too much. It was overdoing it. If it was going for that effect that usually helps, where it's, oh yeah, it's quickening the pace, but if you overdo it, I can't get as invested, and I just can't take it all in. It's just way too much. It almost starts to feel like a comic book or a cartoon. So back to the scene, Louise is asking Jane if she'll take Ziggy to get a paternity test, which is just already messed up and way too aggressive on a first encounter. And Louise is just trying to squash the idea of her wonderful Perry being a rapist. And it's so messed up that Louise even suggests the idea of Jane being drugged here and not in a right state of mind when it happened. And this episode and that aspect made Louise very unlikable and really harsh. And we'll get more into that when they have a scene coming up at the coffee shop. So now some of Renata's worst fears are coming true, and her daughter Annabella has a serious anxiety attack in class and is taken to the hospital for it, almost unconscious. This was also a little close to home for me too. I mean, I remember at a young age getting some serious anxiety attacks, and I'm happy they filled humor quickly here with Renata, because it was very sad to me to see that little girl just even in a stretcher for that reason, that young of an age. But you see here at her bedside, Renata tells Gordon not to talk to her and starts to blame bullying right away. And the doctor suggests counseling for the whole family. And I love how Laura Dern just mocks him. But the doctor's completely right. Her stress level's not helping this kid's anxiety. Her mom being a mess and the dad being a mess only contributes to it. So then we cut to a scene with Abigail and Madeline. And Abigail's feeling guilty about blurting out about the affair. But what I loved about this scene was the line when they're talking about Madeline's fear of her daughter not going to college and how much she wished she went to college, and she's in denial about it. And Abby's like, Mom, you would turn into a puddle when the Scarecrow got his diploma in The Wizard of Oz. So some great deep cut humor there. And you see, just like Celeste, she tells her mom Ed isn't going to leave her. So we're seeing that Madeline's in full paranoia mode now, and this episode did a good job at setting up her just huge fear of losing Ed. So now we see this crazy scene at Renata's house where we see Dr. Bo Peep. Is this a real thing? Can anyone confirm that? Because that was crazy to me, but it totally makes sense too. That's how you would get a kid at such a young age to open up to someone. But the actress who does Bo Peep here was great. I love how she just takes out her fake teeth when the girl goes outside and gets very serious out of nowhere, tells the parents it really roots from her fear of climate change she's learning about at school and the end of the world, title of the episode. And then she says to Gordon, she's worried about you going to jail. And Renata's like, see? And the best delivered line of the season is when she then looks at Laura Dern. She's like, and she's worried about you. And the way Laura Dern says, me, was perfect. And she alludes to that the daughter thinks something's been going on with her for a long time, referring to the secret that Renata is keeping. So I really like Corey and Jane's chemistry here. So we see them on this practice date that he set up. Again, another scene that was way too fast. I think there was 3 lines in this whole scene and it cut. But an important line there was him saying how he wants to know about where the fish came from, where they live, etc. before he eats it. But it connects to later on when Bonnie suggests that Jane opens up to Corey about where she's come from, everything she's experienced. And it's a nice little hint at that, and that Corey's the perfect fit for a person like Jane and what she's going through. He's generally a good guy. And then what really pissed me off was the next scene we just zipped to is Meryl Streep now in the detective's office, and this is just a paint-by-the-numbers scene. You knew this was going to happen. Just the lines here were kind of lazy, where she's just like, oh, you knew he didn't slip. And a scene like that, we should have got a little more dialogue and a little more time to be there. That's such an important thing we've been waiting for, and they kind of just zipped over it. I mean, it must have even been ridiculous filming some of these scenes where they get the script that day and there's 2 lines on the page. Come on, let's get an actual scene out of that. So clearly the best writing in this show is when Celeste is with the therapist, and another standout scene here where Celeste just doesn't believe she should let go of the good memories of Perry. And this is how your mind gets messed with as a victim of any type of abuse, that you would think it'd be better for you to just think positive about someone. But in cases like this, when you have to protect yourself, it isn't. It's not the truth you're thinking. You're lying to yourself, and it's unhealthy. So the therapist repeats to her how he almost killed her and how many times he could have just killed her from kicks. But the A+ writing is when the therapist says she deals with veterans all the time and they have a trouble adjusting to normal life and they miss the war. It's too mundane, day-to-day living. And her just saying you miss the war, Celeste, whew, A++. Whoever wrote that writing is genius. It was a great moment, and that's one of those moments in shows you just learn from, enjoy, and it's so earned. And then she notices the bruises on her wrists, and the therapist is hinting that she might be self-inflicting wounds, and Celeste is complete denial about it. Says it was just from the little tug-of-war she got on with her kids. Celeste is getting defensive about it. She's like, I'm not a statistic. I'm not like other people who do that. And the therapist is like, are you an addict? Is Perry your drug? So she's nailing Celeste once again this season. It's totally true. And this drug appearance of Perry really is a good theme here in this episode and strongly conveyed, and you'll see that in the closing scene when she looks in the laptop, which we'll delve into and how that relates. So now we see Corey walking Jane home, and which I expected, he went in for the kiss, but she super hesitant to this. It's almost like some PTSD she's experiencing from her last sexual experience with Perry and getting assaulted, so that's going to take time. But again, the perfect guy for this is a guy like Corey who understands. He gets it. He's non-threatening. And she tells him about Ziggy, and he's like, oh, I want to meet him. You know, which was really makes you like the guy even more. And Shailene Woodley, the actress of Jane, has stated that this season really, her storyline is a storyline of healing. So I think you're going to see a lot of this light, joyous stuff for her because she really had the darkest stuff going on last season and it was pretty damper, so I think it makes sense, and especially so the whole show doesn't feel too dark at times. And it's interesting to see how someone who was a victim of rape adjusts to now trying to date normally again and feel trust again. So in this scene where Mary Louise and the kids are watching all the Perry memories on their iPad, this scene actually got me worried about Celeste because this isn't helping her seeing this. Again, it's just feeding that biased love she has for Perry at the moment, that he was just good, and just blanking out the bad, and they're feeding it because the kids and the grandma are only saying good things about him. So she's going to, just being around that, fall into that trap. And what scares me is you can clearly see Nicole Kidman looks at Meryl Streep here while they're watching, and almost seems like she feels a little bad for Mary Louise now, just seeing Mary Louise look at Perry clearly heartbroken. So Celeste has kind of been this seesaw character this season, and that was the most tilt the other way for me, and that worries me where she might end up. So now we see Mary Louise is just straight up stalking at this point and just shows up where Jane's picking up Ziggy from school. So this is a really sick and twisted scene to me with Mary Louise and Jane, because it's showing you how far Mary Louise will go just to get her conscience cleared and her thoughts about Perry where she wants him to be, and just kind of directly goes to the root of what she thinks is not true, and that this girl's making this up about him being a rapist and just wants to hear the different side of it. And she's showing Jane pictures of Perry's brother that looked like Ziggy, and this will really mess with Jane's head, and this is not good. And her just asking her these personal questions about that night and if she was tempting him. And this is like victim blaming. But I love that Jane stood up for herself and just basically was like, your son raped me. I was screaming for him to get off me and he wouldn't. And you gotta catch too, it seemed like Jane was a little concerned that Celeste told Mary Louise about the violence her and Perry experienced in their relationship. I think Jane was more on the team of, let's not let everybody know that stuff at the moment. Again, because it could be used against them in their big lie. And then you get a little quick scene you got to catch where Celeste is throwing cover up now on her bruises. So she's knows now the therapist caught her and she's hiding it. Also showing you her not taking the route of recovering and just being in denial about it, and the self-inflicting that she's doing. So then we see now Bonnie and Ed hanging out, and Maddie sees them together, and is this not the biggest smile we've seen Bonnie? Maybe the only smile we've seen her put on this whole season. I mean, look how happy she was around Ed. These two are perfect for each other. Ed is all about listening to people's feelings and reading people, and Bonnie is someone who needs that and appreciates it. And I love Madeline sees this too, and she's like, you look better, Bonnie, much brighter. And she says to Ed, how long are you gonna punish me? And he said, maybe this would be a twofer. I can piss you off and piss Nathan off, because Bonnie is his wife. And Madeline's like, that's just cruel and you're not cruel. And he's like, yeah, but that part of me didn't work, so why not mix it up? So I have to say, from the guy perspective, I've been where Ed's been before, and I've behaved this way Ed's behaved, and I think that roots from feeling so betrayed by someone you're dating, and it almost makes you feel worthless. And from that, you want to feel worth, and it's driving you to get revenge and driving you to almost tell yourself that you're just as good as this person, if not better. So that's where that comes from. So I thought that was really well done writing and felt so realistic in how people would react after infidelity like that with Madeline. And how Madeline react. I mean, I've had that stuff said to me too, where you're being cruel and you're not cruel. So you're kind of getting called out for your fakeness. And yes, no matter how you feel and that you might deserve something or someone should treat you bad, there is still always a line, and Ed's clearly crossing that at points. And this was a case with that line about Nathan. So some of these appearances of Mary Louise are getting a little silly in the sense of just happenstance, where she's just happens to be everywhere at the right time, and now she just happens to be the real estate when Renata's there. It just felt way over the top with this, but so be it. So we see Bonnie now talking to Jane while they're watching Corey play with Ziggy, and how Bonnie's telling Jane, you gotta let him know who you are if this is going to get serious. And this, again, was hinted at with Corey talking about the fish and wanting to get to know people. So we know he's that type of thinker and that Jane should be doing that. And Bonnie's giving her very good advice. Bonnie also calls herself out for being a hypocrite because she hasn't been able to open up to Nathan at all of recent time. And Bonnie, clearly out of the Monterey Five, is the most self-aware and can see her flaws. And man, now we come back to this Renata house, and Gordon, we're in his playroom with all the toys. It's so funny, and that jungle music playing was hysterical. He's drinking heavy. I can relate to the toys as an adult and having people tell me to sell them, just like Renata does here, which was awesome. But Gordon calls her out, saying he also feels like something's going on with her and that their daughter can see it. And this again is alluding to her hiding this big lie. However, a problem I've seen with the writing about her character is we've only been able to see on screen all these humorous moments with Renata, and it's amazing. She really is the comic relief of this show, and she's crushing it. However, when they're saying this, it almost feels not believable because they really haven't given her a scene to show her pain in hiding this lie. It's kind of just seemed like she's not even thought about it. I don't think that's the actress's fault at all. I just think that the writers did not properly put in a scene to make that more believable, that the dad and the daughter see that. Because as the audience, I feel like we haven't seen that yet. It's all been fun and games with her and humor and screaming, but not actually we haven't really seen her think about the lie. So that just felt odd and not earned. So Reese Witherspoon here has a standout scene and really shows her acting chops as Madeline here, when she makes a speech at the assembly about the kids knowing about climate change. And it's so funny because they're expecting her to go up and defend the parents, but her angle actually goes to what the principal believes and being truthful and preparing kids the right way and telling them about what the world's really like. And she's talking about lies and how he lied to them, and it's not all rainbows. And I love the rainbow connection line here and the jokes about that, and that she says someone wrote it, but the sadder part, someone believed them when they wrote it. I thought that was great, and she did the crying there perfect. And it was a cool touch too that at the end of that speech, the camera shows all the seats empty and just Ed, and that's who she's really thinking about and talking to in that moment. But I will say, after that happens, it felt a little bit harsh and out of character in Celeste to just yell at Ed after that he should have went up there and helped her. I thought that was kind of insensitive to their situation, and I don't know. I just didn't feel like Celeste, the character, would be that nosy and not in her place to say something like that. Maybe I'm being a jerk here, but I just felt like that made her look mean, and I don't see that in her. So not gonna lie, I did tear up a bit when Corey and Jane do this hug and it becomes a dance. And it was so earned just from the little scenes we had of them in this episode. And just to see Jane tear up here and feel that warmth from a man now was really good, and to see the complete opposite type of man that Perry was pretty cool, and it was a touching moment. I thought it worked really well, and to be just from something as innocent as a hug. So then now we go to Celeste, and she's pleasuring herself to this video of Perry, and this also is kind of a commentary on our time now in the world where there's all this technology and all this access to memories, especially people who died, and especially loved ones. And it almost is a crutch and feeds any addiction you have to somebody, like she does to Perry, like the therapist said. And she is pleasuring herself to him in a video he did that was a sexual video. And it makes me just think, like, wow, if this was like the old days, it would be a letter you had or just some old pictures of someone. And it's kind of easier to move on, but we have so much access to everything now, and everything's recorded, that it's almost too much. It's like you got to let that go. It's not even healthy at that point to look at someone you lost that much and that intimate. She's only feeding that addiction. So I have super conflicting thoughts about this episode. I've already told you my biggest complaint is these cuts, how fast they were. Just slow down. It's way too fast. I can't even get into one scene. Just let it breathe a bit. I'm all for fast-paced editing, but this is hyper speed. But I did like really good themes going on this episode, solid writing, and I like that the story progression actually slowed down a bit. We took a step back because there was so much story progression last week, so you didn't want to fall in the trap of everything getting revealed and playing all your cards. I'm just hoping this season doesn't get too predictable and paint by the numbers, which I felt at points in this episode, especially with Mary Louise. It's kind of all the stuff you expected her to do, and the scene with the detective, again, really lazy writing, exactly what you thought would happen. The biggest challenge this season has is not having that hanging mystery going on like season 1 did, to keep you on your toes. I just feel like they need to develop some stronger anchors here to keep us invested and not to become too much of just a human drama, which they're so good at, but we also need the driving force to amp up a bit. But overall, I still enjoyed it. Again, such great humor here and there. I feel like we just need a curveball to come in next episode, some kind of twist. So this is an 8.8 for me. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment and try to respond to as many as I can. Please subscribe so you don't miss one of my reviews of Big Little Lies. I'll be doing every episode. I'm also covering The Handmaid's Tale right now, so you don't want to miss that. And please follow me at SteveVarley1 on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.